Mike Manier with the Pacific Salmon Foundation. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Salmon Matter, a co-production of the Pacific Salmon Foundation and Conversations That Matter, and our audio-video partners here at Oh Boy Studios in Vancouver. Today we're joined by Colin Middleton, who's a biologist with the Pacific Salmon Foundation, and also joining us is Jamison Atkinson with PSF partner, the BC Conservation Foundation, and Will Duguid, who is completing his postdoctoral research at the University of Victoria. We're going to be talking today about what we at PSF refer to as the Bottlenecks program. This is really about tracking salmon. My daughter, of course, 14 years old, has been supporting the polar bear tracking program for many years. Polar bears, of course, live above the water on ground. It's easy to track and video them and take photographs and send those to donors like my daughter. Salmon, a little bit more tricky to track, of course, because they're underwater and they have a very wide life cycle from fresh water all the way out to the open ocean and back again. Many challenges facing them, which is part of what we'll be talking today here in the Bottlenecks program, and how far we've come in the ability to track salmon throughout their life cycle. So Colin, welcome, and perhaps you can start off by explaining to viewers of Salmon Matter what is meant by bottlenecks and why they matter to our understanding of the overall survival of salmon.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Mike. So a bottleneck in the context of salmon survival can really be thought of as any event or a series of events that result in a sharp decline in a given population over a relatively short period of time. So these events can happen throughout different stages of the salmon life history through natural events like predation, drought, nutritional stress, or anthropogenically via mechanisms such as habitat loss or fragmentation or overfishing. In the context of this study, one of the primary hypotheses to account for the dramatic declines in Chinook and coho stocks throughout the Salish Sea in recent decades is that of a survival bottleneck acting on juvenile fish. So in this study, we're really focusing on understanding the factors and the mechanisms that might be limiting productivity during this juvenile life stage, particularly during the freshwater and first ocean year of life. So that time during when the juvenile migrates out of the freshwater into the estuary and during their first year in the marine environment. If we can identify some of the mechanisms that might be limiting survival during this critical life history stage, then we can hopefully inform some management decisions that might help guide the recovery of some stocks in the region.
Okay, great. Now, of course, this program is an outgrowth of our now 5-year plus Salish Sea Marine Survival Program. We started that in 24-19 in partnership with Long Live the Kings down in Seattle, another salmon conservation organization. As you all know, the focus was to understand why salmon were declining in the Strait of Georgia, Puget Sound, Strait of Juan de Fuca, the Salish Sea, and to look at this from an ecosystem-wide perspective, factors top-down and bottom-up that were affecting salmon. This had never been done before. We've had dozens of projects ongoing, including the Bottlenecks program. This is one that actually we've had some success with getting more funding for, and it's been prioritized as one that will continue. So I'd like to ask the three of you, and Jamison, maybe we will start with you. Today we have the three of you here to talk about this program because it's such a complex initiative with a lot of moving parts. Could each of you just give us a high-level understanding of the component of the program that you're working on, what you're doing, what you hope to learn, and how you think these findings could be practically applied to improve salmon? So Jamison, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, for sure. So Colin and I are managing the over the large portion of the project with multiple different subcomponents. So I'll just talk about a few of them. Today we're targeting to tag up to 60,000 hatchery Chinook and coho along the east coast of Vancouver Island in multiple streams, as well as some on the mainland coast. And this is the main point we need to get to understand the curve of mortality through time. So this is the first point. These fish will be released. We're going to detect them leaving the lakes. And then we're going to go out into the ocean and we're going to do our micro-trolling piece. And then that's going to get us our second point. And we start doing that in September, and we do that through till March. So then we get this first year of their out migrations, and then hopefully we can get enough fish that we can get these survival points at each of these specific times through, early fall and then again in the later winter. We're also going to be targeting second-year fish as well. So like currently we're really on the ground tagging a lot of hatchery fish. Our wild portion of in-river tagging is going to start beginning in the next week or two. Hopefully the outcomes of this project is a better understanding of which life history cohorts seem to survive better. And if we can determine which those are, maybe that will help hatcheries pinpoint and develop methods that will allow these life history variants to increase in production. One of the easy ones that we're doing right now for the hatcheries is looking at overwintering mortality for coho at the Quinsam hatchery. Coho are out in an earthen pond throughout the winter. We've tagged a subset of the population. We will then be able to extrapolate out how many of our tagged fish survived and then say to them, you're losing X amount throughout the winter. And that will help them refine their overall estimates of returning fish and their overall survival. But two, it will also help them understand how many they're losing and how they may be able to prevent that.
Okay, that's great. And Jameson, before we go to Colin and Will to ask about their parts of this project, I want to just do a quick follow-up with you. For those that might be new to this notion of tagging a fish, tell us what does this tag look like and how is it inserted into the fish? How do you track them?
The tags we're using for the majority of this project are called passive integrated transponder tags, or PIT for short. It's RFID technology, the same as you get in your credit card that you will tap. Basically, to detect these tags, well, first of all, the tags are 12 millimeters. They're the size of a grain of rice, and they go into the stomach cavity of fish. We have preloaded tags or needles that we use for fish, so there's no cross-contamination. The tags are detected by PIT antennas installed on the beds of river or within fishways. These antennas create a magnetic field that then charges that tag, and that tag will then send back its 12-digit unique code, which then we have set in our database to a specific fish and its fork length and its release time and which species it is.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thanks very much, Jameson. Colin, how about you? Tell us what are you doing within the Bottlenecks program? What's your work entail?
Right. So I'm a biologist and project manager for the program, and together with Jameson, I'm responsible for the coordination and execution of sort of all of the main components of this project to a certain degree. This includes everything from overall study design to procuring and installing different types of equipment in the field, catching and tagging thousands of fish over the coming years, coordinating a massive volunteer effort that we'll hopefully talk about later on, working with multiple project partners to achieve mutual goals, data management, analyses, and ultimately communicating what we're finding through things like technical reports or peer-reviewed manuscripts, presentations to the public, and that kind of thing.
Including including episodes of TV shows like Salmon Matter, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're already off to the races with the communication. And we will come back. I do want to hear more about volunteers as well. Okay, Will, we haven't really heard from you yet. Welcome. You're doing postdoctoral research at the University of Victoria. Tell us what in particular you're doing within the Bottlenecks program.
Thanks, Mike. I'm in the Juanes lab at the University of Victoria, and together with my colleague there, Katie Ennis, who's a graduate student, we're focusing specifically on juvenile Chinook and trying to investigate what those fish are doing in the ocean during their first winter, and understanding whether that is a critical mortality period for them. So the first winter at sea is a period that we really know very little about. There's been very little work done on Chinook during that period. So that's something that we're trying to change. And so we're out there microtrolling, we're out there tagging fish along with the other folks that are part of this project. But in addition to tagging those fish, we're also collecting a lot of additional information. So we're looking at the diet, the condition, and the past growth of those fish. And we're also looking at microbe loads and the immune status of those fish to see if we can get to the bottom of if this is a period, if this first winter is a period that could be very important in terms of survival of these fish. So I kind of see it that the overall project is about trying to identify when mortality is occurring, and our component of the project is about trying to understand how and why mortality might be occurring.
Okay, great. You know, and we talked a little bit with Jameson there about the pit tagging. Colin, this project is high tech. You know, tracking of salmon is really being advanced by innovations in technology. Give us a sense of how technology is being implemented throughout this project.
Right. So as Jameson talked about, at its core, this program is really built on the use of these pit tags. So this is a technology that, or a method, I should say, that's utilized the world over, and it's really a well-established method for marking large numbers of fish really effectively. So this is something that we've adopted for this program, and utilizing antenna arrays, again, that Jameson talked about briefly there, that are established in key freshwater systems and also at hatchery facilities, and in the marine environment through our microtrolling program. All of the fish utilized in the different components of this study are going to be pit tagged regardless of what component they're used in. We are also utilizing some other technologies, particularly on the adult steelhead side of things. We're going to be using some satellite tracking technology as well as acoustic tagging as well. So this is going to allow us to infer a lot about the distribution of adult fish, sort of where they're going once they're at large in the open ocean through the use of satellite tags. And we'll also be able to make inferences about their behavior sort of in the nearshore environment through use of acoustic tags as well.
That's a good reminder, Colin. So give us a sense, what are the salmon species? You've mentioned steelhead. What are the other species that you'll be studying in this work?
Sure. So the three big species for us in this program are Chinook and coho salmon and steelhead trout. Those are the big three that we're primarily focused on.
Okay, and steelhead, I mean, obviously steelhead, a major concern. Why the focus on steelhead within the Bottlenecks program? I understand that you're examining what's called alternate rearing and release strategies. I heard that mentioned earlier. What are some of the examples of what an alternate rearing and release strategy would look like for people that might be unfamiliar with that?
Sure. So I'll just back up and talk a little bit about steelhead first. So there is no commercial actually for any of these fish, so they can't be consumed by the public or anyone. But these are still super important species ecologically, culturally, and recreationally in the province. However, populations have really declined precipitously in recent decades, particularly on Vancouver Island, which was once a stronghold for this species. So together with our partners at the province, in the provincial government, we're investigating whether hatchery rearing and release strategies can be used as a tool to try to help recover some of these more threatened populations here on the island and elsewhere. So on the adult side of things, we're currently evaluating the effectiveness of kelp reconditioning as an alternate rearing strategy and recovery tool for this species. So because steelhead are iteroparous, that means that a portion of the population returns to the ocean and then again to freshwater to repeat spawn. We can take advantage of this unique life history strategy and intercept out-migrating adults and then rear them in hatchery facilities for a period of time where they're fed a nutritionally dense diet and treated with antibiotics before being released again to continue their seaward migration. Reconditioning is a technique that's been shown to be quite successful in increasing repeat spawning in steelhead kelps and other systems. So it's a strategy that we're evaluating for use in BC here.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I guess particularly considering the state of steelhead in the interior of Fraser, I mean, this is obviously something that may have great potential long term.
Okay, and
thanks.
I will add too that we do have a few kelts currently in the hatchery environment right now, and they've been in there for about a month now, and they've taken quite well to their new home, and they're getting nice and healthy, and we're ready to put some tags on them in the coming days. So we're really looking forward to making that happen, and getting that data back sooner than later.
Oh, good. Nice to hear some positive results early on, too. Now, another phrase that I heard earlier there, again, that might be something new to people that are watching is micro-trolling. And Will, I think we have you to thank for this. We do have a few anglers probably watching this program who are familiar with trolling. So can you talk about what is meant by micro-trolling? You came up with this idea. How'd you come up with it, and how's it working?
Well, I don't know if I can really take credit for coming up with it.
Well, if it's said here, you get the credit.
It was a technique that was developed in collaboration actually with BC Conservation Foundation. So with Kevin Pellet and Jameson Atkinson, who's here today. So basically, this is the use of miniaturized recreational salmon trolling gear to systematically catch and sample juvenile salmon in the ocean. So we were aware that you could catch small juvenile Chinook and coho salmon using recreational gear, and anglers do from time to time catch them. So we figured that if we miniaturize the gear, we could consistently and cost effectively catch and sample juvenile salmon. So that's what we do. We use recreational downriggers, and we use very, very small hooks and small spoons and small flashers, and we fish in a systematic and depth stratified way to catch these juvenile salmon. And it has the advantage that we can use very small vessels, and these are a very cost-effective way to do it, because the alternative method of catching salmon for sampling and tagging in the marine environment is to use a purse seiner, which is extremely expensive and sort of work that we're doing sort of infeasible.
Yeah, you remind me, this has been one of the innovations of our Salish Sea Marine Survival Program, and full credit to you all, but to Dr. Riddle and Dr. Isabel Pearsall for coming up with this, was the notion that we had to be everywhere all at once. And in order to do that, we had to come up with these efficient ways to have regular folks with their vessels out there doing citizen science, and micro-trolling has been a nice extension of that. So thank you for explaining that to us. You also mentioned earlier that the project is going to address the winter period, often called a critical period for salmon. Can you talk a little bit more about that? When we hear this phrase critical periods, why would winter in particular be considered a critical period, and how does your diet, the study on diet that you're doing on salmon, help fill in gaps in that critical period?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So it was Dr. Dick Beamish, who's a retired DFO scientist, who sort of first came up with the concept of winter as a critical period for juvenile Pacific salmon. So a critical period is basically a period where mortality of fish is elevated, and also where mortality rates vary from year to year. And those two things, the elevated mortality and the interannual variability, can make that a critical period for controlling how many salmon actually return as adults. So this is what we're interested in. And Dr. Beamish suggested that if juvenile salmon didn't achieve adequate growth and adequate nutrient storage during their first summer at sea, then they could potentially succumb to starvation during their first winter at sea when there's less food. But we actually know very little about what salmon are doing during their first winter at sea, and whether food is actually limiting, whether they are actually starving. So we're really, for the first time, going out there in a systematic way in the Strait of Georgia in winter, and looking specifically at juvenile Chinook, looking at what they're eating, how much of it they're eating, and their condition, and seeing whether it's plausible or not that this first winter at sea is truly a critical period or not.
Yeah, and I would imagine that, of course, this is all in the context of climate change as well, and we know that waters are warming. Is that something you're considering in this period?
Yeah, so one aspect of what we're doing, and it's an aspect that's being led by my colleague Katie Innes, is developing what's called a bioenergetic model for juvenile Chinook salmon over winter. So as salmon are a cold-blooded animal, in warmer temperatures, the amount of energy they require for basic metabolic function, just to keep running, is higher. And so that means that potentially as waters warm, that energetic cost increases and starvation becomes more likely. So Katie's going to be using the data that we're collecting to basically parameterize, put together a computer model of the bioenergetic status of these fish over winter. And with that, we can then simulate what the effect of changing ocean temperatures would be for those fish. And if increase in the overwinter temperatures in the Strait of Georgia could increase the susceptibility of juvenile Chinook to starvation.
Earlier, Jameson, I believe that this is tagging of both hatchery and wild fish, and we have a fairly active hatchery program in Canada, as you know, many countries along the Pacific Rim do. We're a relatively small producer of hatchery fish in the larger Pacific, but nonetheless, we do have a hatchery program. You are tagging hatchery and wild fish. Did I hear that correctly?
Yep.
Yeah, and so what gaps are you trying to fill, or gaps of understanding in so doing, both wild and hatchery fish?
Yeah, so as you'd mentioned before, this project was born out of the Salish Sea Marine Survival Program, which we worked in the Cowichan, and we kind of started the pit tagging of fish on the east coast of Vancouver Island. And for that project, Kevin designed it as tagging wild and hatchery fish. The results of that project showed that wild fish survive quite a bit better than the hatchery fish do. This is in the Cowichan. And they survive better throughout all points that we had detected them. So from immediate release in the river, wild fish survive better than hatchery fish. In the early marine environment, as beach seining, same thing. Later on, we did some purse seining. Wild fish were surviving better. And then as we moved to the fall micro-trolling, the same results were born. So that is one of my big questions is this consistent? Does this go across systems? Or perhaps is this just a Cowichan piece? One of the other issues is most of the systems on Vancouver Island no longer have wild-only genetics. They are been influenced by hatchery fish, so their genetic bank is quite small. So that's another question we have is, what are the comparisons between wild and hatchery fish in the systems where we can get it? And what are the differences of those fish? And if, say, for one system, wild fish are surviving better than hatchery fish, how can we make the hatchery fish be more like wild and make their survivals increase into a point where it seems to make sense?
Okay, great point. So really to try to help improve how hatcheries are effective in their operations. And of course there are large-scale hatcheries, but then we also have many community-based groups that the Salmon Foundation supports. And we know they're very interested in this study because they want to make sure that their hard work and volunteer labor is having a positive result for the fish. So thanks for clarifying that for Jameson. So this is a fascinating study. It obviously has many moving parts. Colin, you sort of alluded to some very preliminary positive, I don't want to say results, but positive milestone, I guess, relative to the steelhead that we're working with. Are there any preliminary findings, anything you know early on here that you can share?
So we're just really getting our field program off the ground this spring right now. As Jameson mentioned, we've been in the hatcheries recently tagging a lot of fish, and now we're sort of transitioning into our wild juvenile capture in river, and we'll be moving into the estuary environment in the next month or so. So right now we're just in that stage of getting tags out into fish. So we won't know until potentially this fall, but more than likely the fall of 2022, I guess, when we start getting some of those early fish returning from this cohort of fish that we're currently tagging right now. So it is pretty early days. We don't have a ton of results to date. But yeah, we're looking forward to getting that data from those steelhead soon. I think, yeah, that's probably it.
And how has COVID impacted this? Has it slowed the project down, or because you're in the early phases, it really hasn't been much of a problem?
Well, we are in the early phase. However, this early phase was supposed to be this time last year. So Jameson can maybe speak more to that, but our entire field program was delayed by pretty much a full year.
Yeah.
So we received word about the funding for this program at the very onset of the pandemic. So we got the news just as lockdowns happened. So that was a bit unfortunate.
Yeah, it was. It delayed. We shifted our entire program in a full year. We would have been in hatcheries and in the rivers tagging wild juveniles last spring, but obviously COVID hit and we shut it down. So we had to redo our budgets. Luckily, BC Shrift was very accommodating to this, and they allowed us, which increased our marine sampling for the first year. However, we got off to a really good start. And then when COVID cases picked up in November, our volunteer fleet, which were going out with our biologists, we had to cancel because of safety concerns. So we did not sample as much as we were hoping for with the volunteers because of COVID.
And BC SRIF, of course, which you mentioned, Jameson, the BC Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund, which is a provincial and federal joint fund that's been funding this. How many years is this project for again, Jameson? How long will this run for?
This runs till March 2024.
Okay, so we've got some time to catch up then, ostensibly. Yes. Good. Great. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask is give us the geographic scope for where your research will be occurring. Is this just Vancouver Island, or are there other parts of the Strait of Georgia that'll be part of this?
Sure. So right now we're primarily focused on the east coast of Vancouver Island. So our programs are up and running in the Cowichan, on the Nanaimo River, the Englishman, Little Qualicum and Big Qualicum systems, the Puntledge River and the Quinsam Rivers, and in their respective hatcheries in those systems where they exist. And that's all on East Coast Vancouver Island. We are looking to expand over to the Sunshine Coast on a couple key systems over there. And then following this summer fall microtrolling effort, we will be exploring a Fraser River into where we can expand.
Okay, great, good. And you've talked about volunteers. Jameson just mentioned it there in the context of COVID. We have a lot of our marine science programs do engage volunteer citizen scientists. Tell us how you're engaging volunteers, and are there opportunities for people that might be watching who want to get involved with this project? And any one of you that wants to take a stab at that, feel free.
Sure. I will say right off the bat that, like Jameson alluded to, our microtrolling program was curtailed because of COVID. So that's where our biggest need for project volunteers is right now. So this capturing and tagging juvenile fish in the marine environment is where we could really use some extra help. So if you're an experienced marine angler with access to a boat and downriggers, please do get in touch, because we could definitely use your help in keeping up our efforts to get these tags out throughout the Sailor Sea region.
Okay, great. And remind me, how many tags again are you looking to get out there, Colin?
We have lofty goals of 5,000 per species for Chinook and Coho in the marine environment. We're about halfway there, even with COVID effects on our efforts. So feeling pretty positive about things if we were able to put in a full season.
Okay, great, good. Jameson, Will, anything to add on that, on the volunteer front?
No, yeah, we're just hoping to get some keen people out that'll want to do this more than just a day or two. Like, we would like a few years of help.
Okay, well that's good to know. I know a fair number of retired folks that have boats and love to fish. So if people are interested, of course, they can get a hold of the Pacific Salmon Foundation. Check out our website and our contact information is there. Unless, Colin, did you have a particular number or email that you wanted people to?
Yeah, you could email me directly. My email is cmiddleton@psf.ca.
Okay,
That's
great.
probably the best bet. Or just the general PSF info as well, and they can direct me to me.
I hope I haven't opened you up to an inbox full of spam now as a result of that.
No,
good deed
that's
goes
okay.
unpunished.
And I would also just like to add too that if there are any of our current volunteers watching this, just a very big thank you for all your efforts and continued efforts with this project so far. We really do appreciate it. And if it weren't for you guys, we wouldn't be able to do half of this stuff. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's well put, Colin. And as I think either Will or Jameson said earlier, the days of having huge vessels that could go out and do this type of work are in the past. And it's nice to actually be able to work with regular folks who have boats, who are willing to put the time in and do this type of citizen science. We can actually end up covering a lot more, I think, ground and do much more sampling with volunteers. So just echo that point that you made there. I think just sort of a closing question, because we are running out of time here. This is going to go through 2024, as you said. Is this the type of research, what do you hope to see for the future with this type of research? Is this the type of thing we really should be doing ongoing, long-term, in as many systems as we possibly can? Where do you hope, the three of you maybe, where do you hope to see this go in the future? And Will, we haven't heard from you for a little bit, so I'll put you on the spot and see if you have any thoughts on where you'd like, what's your vision, I guess, for this work?
Well, I think what we're doing here is quite new and quite novel, and other technologies have come into play. For example, the use of coded wire tags with salmon, and marine fishery independent survey programs by government agencies using trawlers to try to understand salmon ecology. And these are extremely valuable tools that have provided extremely valuable insights and have developed into long-running programs. So I think what we are doing here is really the first big push to develop some new tools. And just like those tools that have come before, I hope we'll build something that will go forward and will continue to be used to understand the marine ecology of Pacific salmon and provide insights to help manage them.
Yeah, there is so much to learn. Thanks for that, Will. Jameson, how about for you? What do you hope to see in terms of a future direction for this program, the Bottlenecks program?
Pit tag everything. No.
Yeah.
When we first got word of this project and the likelihood of it being funded, my goal was hopefully we could get this to a point at the end of the project we could show other organizations that, hey, this works. If we can make it work, that this works. It gets good data and it provides a lot of insight. What has actually happened is people are interested before we've even really got underway, and the amount of partnerships we've built in the first year is kind of astounding to me. So I don't question whether this is going to go past 4 years. I have a good feeling that it is, and not just in the pit tag realm, but pit tag associated projects such as otolith microchemistry research being done with this project and in conjunction with, and the satellite project and Will's diet stuff and everything else. So I think this project it's our starting off point.
Okay, now you can't use a 25-cent word like otoliths without explaining it. I love otoliths, but for those that don't know about otoliths, tell us what this is about. No,
so an otolith is ear bone of a fish. It develops rings exactly like a tree does, and each of those rings is based on either days or years. And those rings are made up of elements collected from the background water where that fish was in. So we can actually, through the use of lasers and mass spectrometers, we can determine where these fish went based on their background water chemistry. So you utilize our pit tags and then subsampling of fish in the marine environment, and all of a sudden, we know their marine survival, and we have a good idea on where their migration routes were. And is there a difference between the survival of fish in certain migration routes versus others?
Yeah.
Among many other tools we can use with that.
Well, just let me echo a point you made there, Jameson, what I heard you saying about the need for good quality data. This is an issue that people may not know. We really suffer with Pacific salmon conservation from a lack of comprehensive quality data in a lot of situations. And so this program is really trying to build up the knowledge. And I think everybody probably understands that because we're going through this pandemic and understands that having good data and trends and tracking the populations is critical to managing health, and whether that be humans or salmon. So thank you for sharing that piece about data. Okay, Colin, we'll let you have the last word. Colin Milton, who's the program lead on this. Why don't you have the last word on the future, what you hope to see coming out of the Bottlenecks program longer term?
Sure. Yeah. So I would just like to reiterate what both Will and Jameson have already stated. We are definitely just laying the groundwork here for what we hope is to be a long-running project. So a lot of resources have been invested in this program in terms of infrastructure and effort. And over the next 3 years, we really just want to highlight the utility of pit technology for answering key questions about salmon ecology and management in the province, and really lay the groundwork for what we hope can be an extensive network of monitored systems that are maintained by different groups and partnerships throughout the region. We're on the east coast of the island right now, but very easily moving up to the North Island, west coast of the island, and even the mainland coast in the coming years.
That's great, Colin. That really is the PSF approach, through partnerships. No one can do it alone, so thank you for echoing that. Listen, gentlemen, this has been really wonderful. I know this is a complicated project and undertaking, but you've really helped boil it down and make it understandable to the history majors like me in the world. Anything that you'd like to add that I didn't get to with my questions from any of you before we close out this episode?
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on what you talked about, partnerships, like as Jameson said, before we can even get this equipment in the river, we're already being approached by different community groups and organizations who are keen to partner up and work with us in collecting data that's useful for the studies that they have going on, and also mutually beneficial to us. So I think I'm really excited about all the opportunities that can come from that, and feel like that's really how any of this stuff is going to get done in the coming years, is through those partnerships that are so key, whether it's with governmental organizations, DFO, or the province, or smaller community groups and other nonprofits. It's a really exciting thing going forward.
And I know First Nations are also included in there, and the original Cowichan
Absolutely.
project, if I'm not mistaken, had very strong leadership role from Cowichan. Jameson, Will, anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
I was just going to reiterate your comment there. This is also in collaboration with all First Nations in whose territory we are working in, as the Cowichan and the Stenamo, Big Qualicum, Rosewall. The Atlegay Fishery Society has been a large partner for us so far in this, for the Quinsam and the Black Creek systems, and hopefully they will continue to work with us throughout.
Great.
I'd say it's a heck of a lot of fun to be doing this kind of work. So that's, it's a privilege, right? It's a privilege to have the opportunity to work with a very cool system, very cool species, and a lot of very interesting people.
Well, and I'd throw that right back at you. Some very interesting people. You guys are great to work with. We really appreciate all the energy, time, and creative thinking that you're putting into this. At the end of the day, we've got to restore these salmon, and it's this type of creativity that is going to help us do it. So thanks to the three of you, Will, Jameson, and Colin, for all your work. And we'll look forward to having you back here to talk about results. But keep well out there. Stay healthy, and again, thank you very much for being a part of the show today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Okay, great. Well, that will wrap up this episode of Salmon Matter. This project we've just been talking about, the Bottlenecks project, has been funded through a grant, joint grant from the federal and provincial BC Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund. This has been a game changer, really, and the federal and provincial government deserve a lot of credit. This is a $140 million plus fund that's been established for groups like PSF, First Nations, and community partners to do these types of projects that otherwise were not being done, focused on recovering and restoring our wild Pacific salmon stock. So huge credit to our federal and provincial government leadership. This is a major source of funding to PSF, so we want to acknowledge, obviously, our government partners in that program and thank them for that. It's our tax dollars at hard work for the wild salmon, which is a good thing. This program is also highly collaborative and really wouldn't be possible without the leadership of many in the salmon communities. We say First Nation groups, community partners, and educational institutions. We have many partners all across British Columbia that we work together with. And so we want to take a moment just to acknowledge and thank all of the partners who have been supporting this program. And that'll wrap it up for this edition of Salmon Matter. We'll keep coming at you with these interesting stories from the work of the Salmon Foundation and our partners to keep you up to speed on what we're doing. Again, this is a co-production of the Pacific Salmon Foundation, Conversation That Matters, and our friends that produce the show here at Oh Boy Productions in Vancouver. Thanks for joining us. Keep well, and we'll see you again soon.